Welcome to the Podcast Summit. My name is Sam Bonham. I work at the BBC and I run a podcast for BBC News. And I'm going to be hosting today's summit alongside Sarah and also Remy, who is on a plane at the moment coming from a wedding. Really exciting to be here for the Podcast Summit. Hopefully we're going to have some great conversations about different aspects of podcasting. Hopefully you've had a nice couple of days in Greece already. Anyone been anywhere? Anyone been to the Acropolis? Been up the hill? Yeah, okay, a little bit of that going on. There are actually, one of the bits of housekeeping I've got is that there are actually some free tickets to the Acropolis which people can pick up from the information desk, which I think are available today. And I think it's first come, first served, so if you want to get one of those, then go up. But I don't think it's that expensive to go actually, but anyway. So we've got 4 sessions that we're doing today as part of the Podcast Summit. We're going to cover different aspects of podcasting. We're going to look at celebrities and the use of talent on pods. We're going to look at visualization, going to look at monetization, and also social media as well. Each session we're going to break down into a few different parts. So we're going to have a couple of presentations, we're going to have a bit of discussion, we'd love to get some Q&A and do some talking with you guys as well. And actually, I think the more dynamic, the more kind of chaotic, frankly, this afternoon is, the better, and the more questions and the more discussion that's going on, the more interesting this will be, I think, for everyone. We've got 6 brilliant speakers from all over the world. But yeah, the idea is that this is a loose, informal, insightful afternoon. 4 hours we've got in this room talking about the different aspects of podcasting, and the more questions and the more discussion, the better. Little bit of housekeeping. So we're going to run through from now until just after 1 o'clock. There is lunch provided between 1 and 2, and then we'll be back in here afterwards. And then there is a coffee break at 3 o'clock, which we will pause briefly for. We probably won't have a load of time to pause there, but we'll try and pause briefly. And then after the summit today, there's a networking session, or rather a networking drinks event, not session, which is happening in the exhibition area, and that'll be going on for about 90 minutes. There's also actually a podcast happening in this room. So the Australian superstar, Jackie O, which many of you may know, she's talking in here with her best friend, Gemma O'Neill, about their podcast, A Best Life. So if you want to watch that, you can be part of that. And there's also a Greek session with a legendary Greek broadcaster happening elsewhere in the venue as well. Have people downloaded the Swapcard app? People figured out the Swapcard app? If you haven't, I recommend downloading the Swapcard app. It's got the program on it. It's got all of the speakers. It's got all of the delegates. So actually, if you want to get in touch with any of the delegates that you don't know, or you do know, or you'd like to get to know, or you want a job, or you have a job, or whatever it may be, it's very helpful. It's very good. So I recommend downloading that. Or actually, there's loads of information on the website as well, so you can check it out there. Any questions so far? No? Okay, all right, good. Okay, cool. So I've actually got a couple of questions. Just to get to know you, Sarah sent out a note last night asking a few bits and bobs, and we'll come back to that, I think, throughout the day. But maybe to just get started, just so we kind of understand a little bit about who you guys are and what you're after. Who here is running a podcast? Who here is running 2 podcasts? 3? More than 5? Okay, so most people have got kind of 1, 2 or 3 pods. Who's working in public service? Okay, a bit more than half. Commercial? Independent? Okay, all right. Who is working with celebrities? Okay, quite a lot. Who would like to be working with celebrities? Okay, that's cool. Who is visualizing their podcasts at the moment? Who's doing a really great job visualizing their podcasts at the moment? Okay, and who would like to start visualizing a bit more? Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, who in this room is making the most money out of their pod? No, who's really interested in monetization and kind of getting a bit more out of their podcast? Yeah, a few people. And who is looking to develop their social media strategy a little bit more? People still on X? Who's come off X? Yeah, so interestingly, one of the podcasts I look after has come off X Monday to Friday, but is staying on X on the weekends, which is kind of... who's doing it? Who's doing stuff on TikTok? Yeah, Instagram? YouTube? Yeah, okay, more on YouTube than on short form video. Okay, that's interesting. Who's doing anything on Threads or Blue Sky? Yeah, not many. Interesting. BBC, we haven't quite got into those platforms quite yet. Okay, so we have our 6 speakers that are on the screen up here. Emma, Katerina, Rianne, Chris, Leanne, and Barry. They're going to join at different points for different sessions and come up and maybe be part of the discussion and all of that. Shall we kick off our first session? Should we do it? Yeah, okay, great. So, all right, Barry, Leanne, Rianne, do you want to join? So, interestingly, at the BBC, I think, like some of my biggest competitors in the UK are laser focused on talent, and kind of like really kind of prioritizing getting high profile broadcasters and podcasters onto their programs, onto their products. And it's interesting because I think when we're dealing with talent at the BBC, like some brilliant television talent and some brilliant radio talent actually isn't necessarily translating on podcasts, and vice versa. Some of the brilliant podcasters can't necessarily kind of move into TV or back into TV and radio. So there's some kind of interesting stuff going on there. But one thing is absolutely certain, as far as I can figure out, that with kind of more and more competition in the podcast market, the talent that you use is incredibly important, and maybe gives you more chance for success. Anyway, hopefully we'll find out and have a good chat. Lots and lots of interesting stuff. I tell you what, I might just ask a question actually to you guys to start with. What is your favourite celebrity pod, or your favourite pod that's got a really great celeb in it?
I have a new one.
It's called We Don't Always Agree with Sterling K. Brown and his wife Michelle. Brilliant pod. I think it's because they are so unapologetically authentic, and you get a real insight into their relationships. But they also talk about a lot more broader topics like generational wealth, communication and relationships. I binge listened to that one.
Cool. You have a microphone on the desk, Barry?
I feel like you're, it's a little spoiling mine, but Wiser Than Me, Julie Louis-Dreyfus. But otherwise, I don't really listen to a lot of celebrity podcasts.
Interesting. Why not?
Thing. Partially because I spend a lot of time making those shows, and I don't then like listening to them. But it's also how you define celebrity. I listen to a lot of comedy podcasts, and my favorites are hosted by comedians who are well known, maybe. So True with Caleb Huron is like my favorite. And there used to be one called Poog that then translated, which is a tease to the video one. I will bring up that as well.
I'm fond of a podcast that we're doing called Off the Telly, which is hosted by 2 women, both of whom are celebrities. One stars in one of the UK's biggest soaps, or she's about to leave actually, and the other one was one of the stars of Gavin and Stacey, which was a massive hit again over Christmas. I think I like it because they do manage to be quite authentic within it. They're fun and they sort of create a world I want to listen to. But it's interesting because does it translate? Does their TV life translate into a podcast hit? Yeah, Joey's out really.
Okay, let's have our first presentation. Please put your hands together for Barry.
Hi, so I'm Barry. I am the co-head of Pineapple Street Studios, which was acquired by Odyssey, which is a large radio company in America in 2019. So Pineapple is mainly a production studio. So we do a lot of work for hire and a lot of investigative documentary type of things. So just to give you a little taste of where I am coming from within this. So do celebrity podcasts suck? Yes, I think they do, but there's an asterisk there, which is that they suck when the podcast is only being made because they're a celebrity. And like I said, celebrities can mean a lot of different things. I think they can mean a really amazing talent who happens to be very popular. Comedians, I think, make for phenomenal hosts. Actors can make for phenomenal hosts when they're very genuine, and that is really the main thing for me. Is a celebrity podcast can be really good when it is made for a reason, like when it is because they genuinely want to have conversations or they genuinely have a perspective that they want to explore and get to know better. So I think that is what can make for a really good celebrity podcast. And just to give a taste, not to be name droppy or anything like that, but I have worked with quite a few celebrities. Lena Dunham is somebody who we made a show with called Women of the Hour, and that was a show that I loved making because it was Lena using her platform to really tell these stories, and it was her as a narrator, and I thought that it was really fun. This was like a decade ago that we made it. And then currently, yesterday when I landed, I ended up directing 2 episodes via remote with Ben Stiller and Adam Scott because we're making the Severance podcast. I don't know if anyone here watches Severance. If you don't, it's truly a phenomenal show. It's on Apple TV. But we make the podcast, and it's the 2 of them talking about it, and what is so great about them is they love filmmaking, and they love the show, and they want to have these conversations. And you can hear that. I think audio is really, really hard to fake and like have, it's easy to sound insincere, which is why I think it's super important to have a really genuine show if it's being hosted by a celebrity. Which is why it's so important to find their why. I think when if a show is coming in because they're like, well, an agent is like, we have this talent, we want to get into podcasting, okay, but you have to really spend time developing, really figuring out what it is that they're trying to do, what it is they're trying to say. I think, having time to test out what it is like to have an in-depth interview. A lot of times they're on the other side of being on an interview, and it is no surprise to everybody in this room, but interviewing is a skill. It's not just something people are necessarily naturally good at, and so having time to practice and really learn and get better at it is important, and finding out the right format too. So I mentioned Wiser Than Me, and I think this is not a show I make. Nothing to do with it. Lemonada is a completely separate company. We just happen to be fruit related and pineapple and lemon. But I think it's a great example of a show that I am assuming they took time to really develop. Julia Louis-Dreyfus is I'm a huge Seinfeld fan and Veep and everything. I think she's fabulous. I've never met her. But I love that this wasn't just a show where she was talking to a bunch of other celebrities because they're celebrities. She had a mission, which is to understand, what it is like to be getting older and to be a woman in the limelight, really dealing with age. And that is a really interesting perspective to come at. And she had Isabella Rossellini on, and so I just wanted to play an example of that using the Headliner app to make the clip.
Comfortable if I ask your real age?
Yeah, 72. Not and a half, because when I was young, I would say 3.5, 4.5.
Yeah.
Now I took the half away, so it's 72, not yet a half, but soon.
And how old do you feel, Isabella?
Well, it's funny. Inside you don't change. I haven't changed since I was like maybe a teenager. Teenager years are a little bit a torment.
Yes.
But once you hit 20s, doesn't change inside. The outside changes, but the inside stays the same.
So what do you think? You think you feel like you're in your 20s then?
Yes, I don't know. I never really think of age. You know, I know a lot of people talk about my age. I lost my job for age. I got my job back for age. So my life is very based on age. But I never really think about it so much because I don't know what to do with it. I mean, it just happens.
Yeah, exactly. Luckily.
Yeah.
I mean, the alternative is
Yeah,
not
the
what we
alternative
want.
is not so good.
I love it because I think, and I'm experiencing this with someone like Ben Stiller, people will say yes to Julia Louis-Dreyfus because it's Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and people will say yes to Ben Stiller because it's Ben Stiller, and then they are able to let their guard down in a way that I think a guest who is also a big name wouldn't necessarily with a classic journalist. And I think this clip really shows how Julia is genuinely interested in grappling with age and what it means, and is also having fun with it. And that someone like Isabella Rossellini is like down to just talk about this, and then they talk about farming. She has a farm. They just talk about that for a long time. And it's great, and a joy to listen to. And I think that is extremely important when you're working with bigger talent, is finding that joy for them, because the biggest challenge by far of working with celebrities and making podcasts is scheduling. It is a nightmare. It is a nightmare to schedule theirs and then also guests. And so making sure that it is a show that they are excited to show up and make, which then comes across in the audio as well, is important, because finding that 1 hour within their week when they are otherwise doing a million other projects, at least for me, most of the people I'm working with, podcasting is something they are doing in addition to directing movies or something like that. Like, this is an additive thing for them. And so it just really all comes back to making sure it's a show that they want to be doing. And then, because the other big thing is this is work. Hosting a podcast is not super simple necessarily, and I think we all do a really great job of making shows sound very simple in a way, and then people think that they can just host it in a very short amount of time, but it does take work. So in conclusion, is it worth it? I think it totally is, depending on your goal. Is it for money, for building community? It depends. But I do want to point out that I don't think that having a celebrity host means that your show is going to be successful. It still takes a lot to break into a very crowded market. And so I think the show has to be really good. And that is what I think about celebrity podcasts.
Love it. Great. Thank you, Barry.
Great.
What's Ben Stiller's why? What's Ben's why?
We're actually figuring that out for the Severance podcast. The why is pretty simple, which is that they spend so much time making this incredible show, and you can see it, but to hear them talk about it, I talk a lot about how TV and film companion podcasts are kind of like the evolution of DVD commentary. It's way more, I grew up obsessed with DVD commentary kind of stuff. And now it's just way more accessible to have these filmmakers talking about their work. And so the why for Ben was wanting to showcase the incredible people who work on that show to make it as beautiful as it is. But I'm hoping to keep working with him. We're trying to figure out
How do you do that? How do you work on a why? Because I do get it. It's like, I'll get a celeb in just for the kind of sake of a celeb, and what are they bringing to it? But how do you do that?
It is great when you can have 1 or 2 full days with them where you really are just figuring out what other shows do they like to listen to, what shows do they hate, what shows do they like being on is usually helpful. I think it's one of the reasons why Smartless and Dax Shepard have become massive hits in America, at least, is because celebrities are learning that they love to be interviewed by other people who are celebrities. So just spending the time to talk through what it is that they like, what it is they're trying to do, and then practice is the other thing.
Cool. All right, let's have our next speaker, Leanne. Round of applause, please, for Leanne. Come on.
Hello, my name is Leanne. I am head of podcasts at Unlocked, which is a new production company which is part of the Artist Partnership. So Artist Partnership is a leading talent agency in the UK. So we represent a lot of actors, writers, and directors. So primarily my job is to make podcasts with our talent. So everything at the moment is celebrity-led conversation chat shows. So this is just an example of some of our talent. And the reason I'm sharing this is to say that when you're working with celebrities, not everyone is going to translate into podcasts. And I think there's a few things that you should consider. So when I look at this talent list, I'm thinking, firstly, do they even like listening to podcasts? Is that something that they're even interested in? Because even if you have to explain and sell that to them and the amount of work that goes into doing a podcast, you really need to manage those expectations properly. The other thing I find, because I've had a lot of meetings with actors especially, because that's kind of the majority of the people that we represent, the person that you choose to do your podcast, they also have to have a personality outside of whatever it is that they're doing. So if it's an actor, for example, I find that a lot of actors are very actory actors, and they may not be known for showing their personality or having specific viewpoints on certain things. And I think it's also a way you can figure that out is primarily looking at their social media pages. Are their pages very static, or are they dynamic? Are they talking to their audience? Are there hobbies or causes that they really care about that you can really see? Those are the sorts of things that I think can help inform whether a person will be able to translate well into audio. Because they have to be able to talk about something they really love and care about for 30, 40 minutes or an hour at a time. So those are the things that I would think about when choosing what celebrity to work with. The other thing is some celebrities may have a massive platform, but it also may not translate into podcast as a particular medium. So yeah. So here are some considerations that I think you should consider when working with celebrities. Like I said, do they even like podcasts? One thing to consider is, can the talent that you're working with carry a podcast on their own? And the reason I say that is because even though somebody may be particularly well known for a particular field, being behind a mic is actually quite exposing, especially for one person as an individual. And there's actually very few podcasts that have found a lot of success being solo, even if they are interviewing someone, because as like Barry said, not everybody has that skill set to interview people. And yes, you can coach them, you can spend time with them, but you should also think about what that format is. So could it be a thing where you create a format that allows for a more directive discussion, so the host doesn't have to work as hard? So for example, I just released a show with Rebecca Front, who is an actress in the UK, was on some old comedy shows, and it's her first time hosting an interview show. And so we made a format which is called 3 People That Changed My Life, and we get each guest to pick someone from their past, present, and future that have changed their life. So we have a very clear structure in which she can interview those guests, and it makes it a much more free-flowing conversation. And if they do need a co-host, ask your talent about who it is that they can sit and chat to for hours. And it doesn't necessarily have to be someone famous. It could be a family member, it could be a friend, it could be someone that is not even well known at all, because what you're really looking for is that chemistry. Now you can bring 2 celebrities together, or 2 talent that don't really know each other together. And if you do that, I would highly, highly recommend chemistry testing, and chemistry testing a few different combinations of people, and just really see what works on mic. The other thing I would say when you're working with celebrities is really manage those expectations, especially when it comes to the commercial side. Making podcasts is not something that's going to make money overnight. We all know this, but not all talent understand this, especially if they're working in media or TV and film and they get paid 10 times much more money elsewhere. They need to understand that this is a long-term investment, not only in time, but in terms of money as well. But I think what is really appealing to celebrities about podcasts is that it's a platform that they can own, that they can develop, that they can really show their personality on a different way that they can't do in other projects. As Barry said, scheduling is always an issue. So if you're going to commit to an always on, actually think, is this realistic with this person's schedule? Do we do it seasonally? Yes, you can think about the limitations with monetization when you're doing it seasonally, or do you pre-record a bunch of episodes and release months later so that at least you can have a consistent running show later in the year? And another thing that's really important is willingness to promote the show, which sounds very, very obvious. But what I'm finding is, especially when social media is such a big platform for monetization for a lot of talent, people are very particular in how they like their feeds to look. So when you are designing that podcast in terms of what it looks like, make sure it's in line with something that they are going to be comfortable with promoting, because unless you're working within a bigger network, that will be your primary source for promoting a show from the beginning. So you need to make sure your talent is going to promote the show. Otherwise, no one is going to listen to it. And there are some benefits that I wanted to talk through briefly around working with talent, is that, yes, because you have an already existing audience, it, in theory, is quicker to build an audience because you're not starting from complete scratch as if you were starting with a talent that is unknown. However, you still do really need to work hard in order to engage that audience, get them to go and listen to the podcast, and then sustain the audience. It also allows for wider reach in terms of storytelling and promoting issues, stories, matters that are really important, and you have that potential for the wider reach. You have a high guest booking potential, and brands are also much more interested in the prospect of sponsoring and partnering with shows from the get-go if you have a celebrity at the forefront, especially if that person has other channels, primarily social media channels, that you can also use to monetize the content. So there are benefits, but I would also strongly consider all the considerations that I have put out, because as much as the podcast space is kind of oversaturated, I think, by celebrity podcasts, A, not all of them translate, B, they take a long time to build, and I think, as Barry said as well, don't just fill the space with another show just because. What is the reason that this person is doing a show? What are they bringing that's new, different, unique? What stories are they telling? Because podcasts are a very powerful medium. And I think with that power comes a lot of influence and responsibility. And I think we should be using that very well.
Great. Hey, Leanne, what is chemistry testing? And have you, how well does it, like, I assume it's kind of, if you put people together, you record a pod, right? But like, it's the bit afterwards that I'm quite interested in, like the conversations that you've had afterwards when you've tried to chemistry test people together.
So chemistry testing is when you take I guess a core host and a few different co-hosts, and you pair different people together to see if they have chemistry on mic and what a podcast might look like. I would say it's like the step before doing a pilot.
So it's not a pilot?
I would say it's the step before.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And so I use that chemistry test to then decide who I will pilot with and do the full format with. I like to keep a chemistry test quite free-flowing, because really it's just a test of seeing how people get on a mic. Because sometimes you even find that as soon as the mics go up and the cameras go up especially, some people just freeze and you just don't really get the same. And so in terms of managing that, it's always about managing those expectations beforehand to make sure that everybody knows this is just a chemistry test. We are testing different people. This may not go to production, but if we do really like you, then we'll go to pilot. So it's always about managing those expectations from the beginning.
Yeah, so actually the conversation happens before the chemistry test, not after. So you don't have an awkward conversation afterwards.
Well, it is a little bit awkward if you're letting them go, but they know that it was never a done deal.
Did you chemistry test Ben Stiller, Barry?
No. Although he wanted to do it with Adam Scott, and that was great because they work very well together.
Cool. Let's have our next speaker. Rhian, thank you.
Okay, there's my favourite celebrity. Oh no, it's not. Ta-da! Reveal. Hello, my name is Rhian, and I'm a commissioner at the BBC. I commission podcasts and formats, and I'm also the head of digital for audio speech, which I suppose translates into I mostly have a lot of fun and work with some brilliant people, including Sam Bonham. So, the exam question is, do celebrity podcasts suck? So, I wanted to just think a minute about whether podcasts are an exception to the idea of audio. So, do celebrity radio programs suck? If you think about some of the radio programs that you've grown up with and that you've loved, they probably involved celebrities, so let's not be too judgy. If George Clooney wanted to come and host a Radio 4 programme, I would bite his hand off. So I would say yes to George Clooney. If anyone has a contact, see me after. But it's just a way of saying, I mean, I've heard him do some beautiful interviews and host some round tables in a behind-the-scenes Hollywood show. I'm looking at Barry. This is a while ago, maybe 10 years ago. Brilliant behind. I know he's good. He'd be great, right? Anyway. For me, it's not really about the celebrity. It's about the idea, as Leanne and Barry have said. It's about the production, and it's about the audience. So it moves me on to what do I mean by suck, because suck is an emotive word, and as I've said, it's quite judgy, and one person's suck is another person's delight. That is a terrible sentence. So where we are is, what does the audience really want? So sometimes the audience wants something that you don't necessarily want to make. And if so, it's probably not the right space for you. Because I think sometimes, especially in the last couple of years, some of the audience might want something more lean back, more companionable, easy to listen to, easy for them to talk about, easy for them to share with their friends, which is what we all want. So you might end up thinking, I actually need a sucky podcast with a celebrity host. And if you're going to do that, does your marketing make it absolutely clear? Because that's the only way you're going to find your audience. I want to move on to creating new celebrities. So that's about us really believing in the new presenters that we've decided. But when I say new, I mean new to our podcasts. So you, as a podcast maker or a podcast supporter, you've got to want to turn them into celebrities. You've got to really love them. So if you don't back your presenter, you're not going to have a hit. Have you put together something with your presenter that is genuinely lovable? Creating new celebrities also... I think it's quite useful sometimes to look at new genres, because new genres can bring new celebrities. So maybe don't start with the celebrity, start with the point of your podcast. We have a very successful podcast in the UK called Uncanny, with a presenter called Danny Robbins, who is now a celebrity. I think if you find a niche, with a niche comes a very, very loyal audience. And that's a great place to start if you're launching something new. So maybe consider, is paranormal a thing in your country? It is in the UK now. You know, we've sort of rediscovered it and reinvented it with a great host who is now probably a celebrity. Is he a celebrity? He probably is a celebrity.
Yeah, he's a celeb.
We've done the same in health. We've done the same in consumer journalism. So instead of starting with a celebrity and then finding the topic, we've started with a topic that we know there's a genuine following for. Actually, health isn't niche, is it really? But it's quite focused. And then we've managed to grow a host alongside growing the podcast. Hello, old celebrity, yeah. So it's quite useful, I think, to look at famous people in the TV industry when TV's decided they're a little bit tired of them, because they genuinely tend to have quite a long tail with the audience. So can you take a TV celebrity who isn't so popular on TV now and turn them into a podcast celebrity? I think this happens more frequently than we probably all notice. I mean, we've had quite a lot of success with, I shouldn't say they're on the way down, I won't name them anyway. So who is it that you can rediscover? Because their name will do a lot of heavy lifting for you, and also they tend to come with a familiarity for the audience, hopefully some love, and they'll be skilled because they've been doing that. I know they don't translate straight from TV into podcast, but you've got something to work with because they've got an engagement with the audience. So who might need rediscovering and putting in front of a podcast audience? Helena Bonham Carter, she's narrating a podcast for us called History's Secret Heroes, which is on its third series. It's just launching last week. And she's discovered a whole new podcast audience, and I won't say she was on the way down. She's still an internationally famous and respected actor. But, she translated really well. So maybe it's not a current celebrity. Maybe it's somebody who's been around for a while. Louis Theroux is another one where we helped him move from TV into podcasting. His first podcast before the Spotify one that you might all be familiar with was with the BBC called Grounded, and that happened during COVID. So that was another way of looking elsewhere for somebody who might bring a big audience with them. So in conclusion, do celebrity podcasts suck? We shouldn't turn our noses at them. And if you do them well and with thought and intent, you could end up with a lovely hit on your hands.
Great. Thank you, Rianne. Yeah, why don't we swap places? Why don't I go over there and you come over here? Loads and loads of interesting stuff. Does anyone have any questions off the bat, actually? Does anyone want to jump in and say something? Yeah, okay, let's do it straight away. I think Anna, do you want to grab a microphone? I'll pass my one over for the moment. Yeah, do you want to introduce yourself, say where you're from, and then go for it?
Sure, thank you. I'm Marcio from the Portuguese Podcast Festival. I have a question regarding celebrities, but from the other side. We mostly work with indies and independent podcasts, and not so much with celebrities. And there's always a little bit this cliche that celebrities have the Midas touch, that whenever they come, they bring hundreds of thousands of people with them. And I'd like to know what's your experience about that, whether it's absolutely automatic that they will bring their audience to the podcast, or do they need to work a little bit differently, and do they need to have, so what happens at that level? Thank you.
I'll have a go at that. No, they don't bring their audience with them. I think that one of the things I think would come up again as the day goes on is how difficult it is to transfer people from one platform to another. So, if you've got a TV star or a film star, there's so much friction between getting them from their visual space into a podcast space. And also, sometimes it just doesn't work. I did a podcast a couple of years ago with someone who was really quite famous, and it was truly dreadful, the way that the audience, everyone was kind of looking at it going, this is going to work, didn't work. And you realise on reflection that you let them be too self-indulgent. So that was a big lesson to me and the team who made it, that, it's quite hard to school a celebrity, isn't it? Do you think? I think it's hard to. They're really going to want to go to school. And that's from your opening conversations, is how much investment, as you said, Leanne, how much are they going to invest in this? If it's just something they're just doing for funsies, it's not going to. If it's something they're doing for fun, so I'm being too colloquial, it's not going to work. So I think it's about a really as frank as you can be, conversation at the beginning, and not just with the agent. If you can get into a room with them, and you can figure out whether it's worth your time and your money.
And did you mean just having a celebrity as a host, or did you mean having a guest who is really famous?
I mean as a host, as a main face of the podcast.
I think the whole schooling celebrities, it's like this is one of the kind of cruxes of this stuff, right? Is if you've got someone who has a profile, maybe they're doing quite well somewhere else in the media landscape, but we know that podcasting can be a bit weird, intimate, personal. It can be, different formats, different ways of doing it. But, kind of getting into a meaningful conversation with talent is difficult. Who wants to talk to that? Go on, Ree.
I'm doing some of that at the moment, and we made a plan before we went into this that I was going to be the bad cop. So I'm a commissioner, and so I can say the things that me and the lead producer have decided. And I'm absolutely ruthless. Not in a mean, I don't behave in a mean way, but my line-by-line feedback is, and I am repeating myself for the 4th or 5th time, and we've decided I will carry on being the bad cop. I'm not even doing, hey, the pilot sounded great. I'm not. I'm doing this, 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 and this. Do you want this to be a success? Yeah. So I think bad cop, good cop schooling is quite good, because then they get their ego fluffed, which they love, and you are landing your messages.
Does anyone else have any techniques for this kind of conversation? We have another question over there, Sarah, which we'll come to in a moment, maybe. But anyone got any? Oh, right, yeah, come on, Chris.
Here, this one is.
Yeah.
Hi guys, Chris Marsh from Australia. You're going to get very sick of me later on because I'll be talking a lot, but I did have something to add here. Something we've been doing at Listener in Australia with quite a lot of success in the last little while is running 6-week pilots. And so it's a contract only for 6 weeks, but it's a long enough period, longer than just a single pilot, for them to get a sense of what we can bring to the table and for us to get a sense of what they can bring to the table. And we'll know after that 6 weeks as well about how willing they are to open up their social media and promote the cause.
Do you put the 6 weeks on air? Do you publish it?
Yes. Yep. And if it doesn't work out, then it's been a great little 6-week season podcast that disappears into the ether. But all of them have actually continued. But it allows us to go, this is the contract. If you're not going to promote it on social media, and if we, you might even say you will, but if you don't, then we'll end it. It allows us to test the market in terms of a sales perspective, because 6 weeks is enough for us to be able to get some potential sponsors on board and have a look at it and see how they feel. And it also gets you that long enough period of chemistry to sort of work out the format, do your little tweaks, see where it's going to be, and then come at the end of that 6 weeks and have that frank discussion about where is this going to go, what's it going to become, what's worked, what hasn't, and are you committed to this cause? And if you're not, then fine, we'll say our goodbyes and go from there. And particularly for, not necessarily celebs, but I'll use the other naughty word, influencers, which is what we've been doing a lot of work with. They might come with 2 million people on Instagram or something like that. Okay, you've got 6 weeks to prove that you can leverage that audience into an audio one for us. Because that's why you got your foot in the door. So, yeah, it's been a successful little period for us to be able to do that.
Sounds great. Sounds really interesting. I mean, I think we've used the word celebrity, but yeah, influencer, talent, well-known. It can it's a bit of a euphemism for all of that stuff. And I guess from a BBC perspective, as you're talking, Chris, the thing I'm thinking about is radio. Because sometimes maybe we might give someone a radio show, or we might give them something else. I say give them, commission them, I suppose. And then maybe commit to something longer term later. I don't know really if that's...
Yeah, the thing I was thinking as you were speaking is what is quite public. And is this working? Doesn't sound like it is.
Don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. It is a very public failure. And I think quite a few of the people that we do business with might not take the 6 weeks. So it's something for us to bear in mind. We do run short-run radio series, and you can hear people then, but that's not a podcast format. That will be a radio show. So.
We have a question over there, I believe. Do you want to introduce yourself, say where you're from, and then...
Sure. Hi, I'm Laura. I'm from DW, which is Germany's international broadcaster, and my question is going to your direction, meaning do you have any recommendations for contracts and payment, meaning pay the whole season only for 6 weeks of prototyping, or depending on the success of the show? That will be my question.
So are you asking how do you pay, or how do you pay at the beginning? Go on.
I mean, is there any best practice that you would recommend? I mean, we already have heard that the big audience does not necessarily convert into listenership. Do you have solutions for that? Meaning, pay only for real listens, or retention rates or something? I would be curious to learn more how you pay your talents.
We can maybe talk a bit about IP, intellectual property, here as well.
Yeah. I think it wholly depends on how much budget that you have to play with and the level of celebrity that you're also working with. And so I don't think there's necessarily like a one-size-fits-all, but one thing, there's been a few different things I've been considering in this sort of thing. I think firstly, RevShare is not necessarily an attractive model for celebrities, and so you have to also think about how you can incentivize them. So whether that be having a set host fee for a number of episodes, you could also give incentives with listenership bonuses if they hit a certain amount of listenership in a certain amount of time. The other things I would and then switching to RevShare once the podcast reaches profitability. Another thing that I would consider is if your budget is limited, think about doing a set number of episodes, maybe like 6 to 12, at which point you then take it out to market for a sponsor. And then if you get a sponsor on board, then that again changes the whole remuneration model. And then in terms of IP, we do a 50-50 share between us and the talent. And also that share is reflective of the derivative revenue that we develop. Because another thing that is core to my business model is other forms of content beyond the podcast. Because really, there's actually you're not going to make that much money just from podcast monetization. So it's about those other streams of content. And for me, what's been working most effectively is subscriber-based content, which is Patreon. I've seen that has built the most amount of revenue in the shortest space of time. And so making sure the talent has a good share of that, 50-50 if it's one person. If it's multiple people, then it becomes a little bit complicated. But those are some of the things that I would consider. I don't know what you guys think.
Like I said, I am more on the production side, but our company was acquired by Odyssey, and they do a lot of sales and distribution, that kind of thing. And we used to do a lot more minimum guarantee type of deals, and have not exclusively, but like really stopped doing that, and have just gone to revenue share if they are owning the IP. I think it's also a helpful way to think about that, because, and like a good test, because it's like, are you just doing this because you want a giant paycheck, or are you doing this because you actually want to do this work? And if you're doing it for a rev share, you are incentivized to promote it. You are incentivized to go out and try to make this actually work because you're on the hook for revenue. But another thing that we've done to kind of sweeten that deal is build production into it. So that's why it's kind of a one-stop shop with Odyssey and Pineapple. We're like their prestige production company. So with someone like Ben Stiller and Adam Scott, who were shopping around figuring out who's going to distribute this Severance podcast, Odyssey was able to say, well, not only can we do sales, we can actually provide really great production, and it's worked really well in that sense. So yeah.
Can I ask you a question back on that?
Yeah.
Can you offer a minimum guarantee because you have a network of shows that you can promote within?
Yeah, so that is a huge aspect too. So Pineapple doesn't have that as much as Odyssey does. And so it's like starting a new feed is so challenging, but Odyssey has hundreds and hundreds of podcasts to be able to market off of each other, which gives a huge leg up for starting a new show, which is, different.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because if you have an existing network of shows like Odyssey, then a minimum guarantee is something that is much more realistic and much more attractive. Whereas because I'm starting individual shows, that's why I'm thinking about things slightly differently. So it also depends on that as well, I think.
Great, very interesting. We have another question here at the front. Introduce yourself.
Hello, Peggy from SBS News in Sydney. We're a public broadcaster in Sydney. So I'm curious about, Rian, you were mentioning niche sort of areas and then kind of matching talent that might not necessarily be celebrities with those niche areas. How do you identify those niche areas, and then how do you identify who should present pilots for those sorts of podcasts?
I know it's not what it was, the podcast landscape, but it's still worth, I think, looking at. Well, I know we all do. You're looking at charts. You're looking at what's out there all the time, and trying to figure out not what's doing well now, what might do well in the future, right? Because I think we all, where I come from, we do too much of trying to make one like this that will work like this and be as successful as this. I'm more keen on scanning the horizon and trying to figure out where the gap is, whether that's a gap across the piece or whether that's a gap for an audience. So I've seen this do really well over here for a certain sort of audience. Can I reinvent it over here for a different audience, different tone of voice, because I know that this particular topic is really driving loyalty. So I think that's maybe a way of looking for a gap rather than just, is there a gap in paranormal? Is to see if there's something that isn't being done for that audience, which you've already have spotted is successful. So you spot that there's a really successful a podcast over here. Can you make it for a younger audience or a different or a female, that sort of thing? Well, did I answer that question? Was there another bit?
Yeah,
to it?
no, that was useful.
And then identifying talent. If you can find talent which is really respected within that space, that is where you start, I think. So you start with someone who then brings an authenticity and a recognition for that audience in that space, and then they'll talk about it because they bring that talkability with them. It's all part of being part of that community which already exists, and then you've got hopefully a host who is in conversation with that audience already, and then you drive that as hard as you can.
Okay, thank you.
And just to broaden some of that stuff out as well, who's approached talent? Who's approaching talent? Like, what's the best kind of way to go out and find these types of people?
I really like looking at guests on other podcasts. Part of it is because the work's already been done for you, because the people who are making that podcast clearly saw something in that person. But I think that's really helpful. And then when it comes to approaching,
because you know that they work in the format.
Yeah. You know that they're conversational. Yeah, you have an idea of what they might be an expert on or something like that. And then also writing to them about what you love about their work, like especially if it's genuine. Like, that is a way to approach. Is like this really had me thinking about that there's so much more that we could talk about. And have you considered doing it as your own show?
Yeah. I work with an agency, so I've got a lot of direct access to talent, and so we had like hundreds of people on the roster. So I look at people that have kind of like a good social media following, because I know that'll be the basis to be able to promote the show. However, that's not everything. I also look at how they use their social media. So are they talking to the audience? Have they guested on other podcasts before? What are they known for? What are their interests? And then based on that, I will then kind of approach them for a conversation, just an initial conversation to find out what they're even interested in. Because even from an initial chat,
approach the individual or the agent.
Via the
Rhiannon
agent
was mentioning, yeah, okay.
Which is also why it's really important to have good relationships with agents, because even internally they can be roadblockers. And then having that initial conversation with the talent, I can usually tell from that first conversation how talkable they are, whether they can probably carry a show, whether they are interested and passionate about the idea, or it might just be a nice to have. So yeah, those are some of the things.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions. Why don't we go with both of them at the same time, actually? So we've got one at the back, and then if we could get a microphone to this gentleman in the white shirt as well.
Well, helpfully mine's slightly more of a comment than a question, I guess. But okay. Going back to that issue of the buy-in from the presenter. So my name's Jeff. I'm from Biscuit Gym. And we've just produced 50 episodes of a James Corden project for Sirius in the States. And so a big part of that project was winning his trust. And I wonder whether anybody else has got any good examples of this, actually. But we brought his writer from the Late Late Show over to the UK to work with us to get his tone of voice. And even things like the format look of the script and the way he likes his cue cards or blue cards, as I now know they're called in the States. When we went over to LA, we hired a lot of his runners from the Late Late Show so that the people buying his coffee were the people he knew and were used to. And lots of those little sort of tips and tricks, because it is about winning their trust. They have to be comfortable working with you. And then as part of that long game, now we are developing more projects with James because we have that trust. And I guess to go to the central question, if you're developing one podcast with a celebrity, you're probably also developing 3 or 4 other projects with them. So
that sounds like an incredible amount of work.
I mean, it is, but then at this level, I think the production values and the production work required do escalate with the size of the talent. And it's, I hope everyone would agree, always worth it.
Yeah. Wait, were you working with Fulwell and Ben Winston?
We were working with Ben, but this wasn't a Fulwell project. No.
Okay, yeah. No, I worked with Ben on the Trevor Noah podcast, and I remember him talking about how they were just starting out working on that with them. But that too, I was going to mention this when you were talking about bad cop, good cop, especially with talent of that caliber. Knowing their people, it is go to lunch with their managers, go to lunch with their agents. I love assistants. Getting on an assistant's good side is I think the biggest thing, because they are the ones who are in their ear all the time, and if they like you, you will be able to get through a lot better. And also, it is about learning what they like, what their it feels a little silly, but it's like, what their order is for coffee and things like that. And then when they show up and it's already there, they are more at ease. And it is also helpful to then know when you inevitably run into a problem, who to go to and how to handle it, because they have gone through many issues before, and they will know how to best approach the talent about something like that. So that building trust to me is like knowing the people around them is huge.
We have a question in the middle.
Can I just say
something? Go on.
I think you've got the patience of Job. Honestly, maybe this isn't. Maybe why I'm not working with James Corden. I think because I think there's another question in there as well, which is, do you want to do this level of work?
Yeah.
And I think that's the question you ask first. Are you a company? Are you a person who feels able to work in that way, or not? I'm thinking maybe I'm not. But it's a massive commitment, is what I mean. I mean, I would do it for George, but I don't know whether I would do it for James.
Great.
Hi, I'm Kevin, head of podcast at NPO in the Netherlands. You touched it a bit, the subject, but I want to go further on it. The management of expectations of talent. Because when they start with 0 listeners. Everybody starts with 0 listeners. And maybe you get up to 50K if you're lucky, if you have a good podcast. But they're used to television numbers, movie numbers. So how do you commit them to build that audience in like 10 episodes and that they're happy with the 50K?
That's a really good question. I think one thing that I've done is when I'm working with a talent and we're starting a new show, is kind of showing them the picture of the long game from the very beginning. So actually mapping out what that strategy looks like from day that podcast goes out to 3 months to 6 months to a year, and what we can achieve beyond that. And a big part of what I do around that is the derivative content. So when are we launching the Patreon? And I do that very early. I do that within either at the very beginning, if it's a really big talent, or 6 weeks to 8 weeks in. And then when are we going to start thinking about live shows? When are you going to start doing press and the guesting on other shows? I think all those additional things, I think, really show the talent that this is a long-term commitment. And though we may not be seeing the numbers immediately, these are all the other things that we're going to do to make sure that we do eventually get there, because we can't say when it's going to happen. So I think having a full strategy before you even go into production, and showing that and talking it through and collaborating on that is kind of one of the ways that I've worked on that. But then also, at that point, you will see whether this person is really passionate about doing this or not, and if they actually even want to do it. Because if they see this is the amount of work that's going to go in and they're not really here for it, then maybe you should consider, do we actually want to make this commitment?
And to the difference in TV viewership versus podcast listenership, I think managing the expectation of it's smaller numbers, but they're really meaningful audience. You are building long-term fans, and it really is about building community. And if that is important to the person, then even if it's a smaller number of people, it's a very passionate group, and a lot of times they want to be talking to those people, and that I think is important to it's not even spinning it, it's just the truth. But emphasizing that is important.
And one extra thought, which is about managing the expectations of your bosses, who think that you bring this person in and it will result in this number of listeners very, very quickly. And I think that shorthand, get the celebrity in, get the success, is something I'm seeing a lot of people nodding in the audience, is just having to explain how building an audience works to bosses and getting their commitment to stay alongside you because you believe in what you're doing, trying to get them to commit early to that, is it?
Well, I think you have the same experience as I have as at the BBC and me at the NPO. Like, we're built on radio and TV, and it's different numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it does benefit us, though. I mean, I don't know whether you put your podcast, not all your podcasts, but some of your podcasts on the radio. I mean, we're very fortunate that we can, really help growth by putting it in front of an audience which we know is there. That helps a lot. I know it doesn't help necessarily find a new audience, but it does help with your numbers.
So we are coming to the end of our first session here, and maybe just to conclude, and thanks so much to everyone for questions and interesting, thoughtful conversation. It's really, it's really interesting, and this can continue. I mean, for those people that haven't been to Radio Days, there's a lot of opportunities for networking. There's a lot of opportunities for conversation. We're even running these Agora sessions, which you may have seen in the program, where after some of the sessions, they're organising kind of focused conversations about different aspects of what's being discussed in the program. So there's a youth one and there's a podcast one, and it's worth checking out Swapcard for that. But maybe just to kind of conclude with this session, just pull out a lesson or a tip or a kind of like single piece of advice that you guys might have for working with talent, working with celebrities, working with online influencers, in the kind of podcast market. I don't know who wants to go first. Yeah.
I would say, as the producer or production house, you have to be just as excited about doing the show, and the talent has to be just as excited about doing the show. Because if there's a disconnect there, then it is going to feel like such a chore. And it's such a, if you want to do it right, it's going to be like a long-term investment of time and money. So make sure both parties are really aligned on that and you both really want to do it.
And I would say maybe look a bit more widely when it comes to celebrity, and also ask yourself what the celebrity actually means. So try and find some old ones, see if you can reinvent them, make some new ones by looking at niches, and think very carefully about whether you want to put the work in to try and attract and then work with somebody who is very current and very exciting.
Be friends with the assistants. Also develop is really important.
Guys, Leanne, Rianne, Barry, thank you so much. Let's together. Okay, let's move on to the next session. And Rianne, I think you can just stay on stage. Okay,